Today's video is about the band that started it all, the origin of the passion and the lifestyle for me, the original, the one and only. This video is about my top 3 Iron Maiden albums of all time. I'm going to talk about reasons why I think they are good based on, you could call objective observations, things that I think speak to the quality of the albums, and also things that have to do with my own memories, how these albums relate to things that happened in my life, important events, important people, and just, the feelings. Of course, Iron Maiden is an elemental band for most metalheads out there. But when you come from Brazil, there's something different about being a metalhead in Brazil and having a relationship with Iron Maiden, because it's all a part of the DNA of every metalhead over there. And the band itself has a very intimate relationship with Brazil, and it's really hard to be a metalhead and not have Iron Maiden as your starting point. It's a very intense relationship that has lasted over the decades, and Iron Maiden kept coming back to Brazil to play consistently and still does. It's perhaps the biggest Iron Maiden audience in the world, arguably. I don't know. As a good Brazilian and as a good metalhead, I've been a fan of this band since I was a toddler. I can vaguely remember the first times that I actually listened to their tunes and enjoyed it and felt the excitement. And every time I would hear Iron Maiden playing, I would feel the same excitement, the same happiness. I was very, very young, and it's part of the earliest memories I have in my life. There is no me without Iron Maiden. It's an integral part of the very core of who I am, my personality, and how I understand myself as a metalhead and as a person in the world. Integral. It's an integral part. Integral. I can say that word. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna talk about these 3 albums in no particular order. First album has to be The Number of the Beast. Released in 1982. This album is a turning point in the history of Iron Maiden because it was the first album to feature Bruce Dickinson in the vocals. It was also a turning point in the music of the band, not just with the new vocals, but with a new sound. This addition of emotion and Bruce Dickinson's more dramatic vocals, and with this addition of more melody to it, made Iron Maiden start sounding a bit more like what we came to know after as power metal. And I think that's one of the reasons why it appeals to me so much. Before that, with Paul Di'Anno, they had a more punkish vibe to them, and that includes Paul Di'Anno's vocals. The music was grittier and arguably less refined, as you would expect from the times when punk was very much big, especially in England. Another reason why I like this album so much, it's because of one of those very stereotypically metal things that make metal awesome, in my opinion. It's just so blasphemous. From the cover to the title, the concept as a whole is just evil. I think this cover is absolutely fantastic because it's a little Eddie being controlled by the devil, who is controlled by Eddie. I mean, cheese. But it's one of the things that makes this album and this cover awesome. It's unapologetically blasphemous and metal. And it's one of the original ones to be so unapologetically evil and blasphemous and metal. From this album come many live performance staples of Iron Maiden over the years. And I'm talking about Hallowed Be Thy Name, The Number of the Beast, Run to the Hills. This album also features one of my favorite Iron Maiden guitar solos of all time, and it's from 22 Acacia Avenue. And every time I listen to it, it's bittersweet because the solo starts right after this horrible, horrible part of the song that the lyrics it just makes me want to fucking punch a hole in the wall. But then they deliver this gift to us on a silver platter that is that solo. It's slow and sexy and stylish and beautiful. It has so much goodness in it. This album also has, and it's very important to highlight that, one of my favorite Iron Maiden songs of all time, which is the title track, The Number of the Beast. It's just everything about it, the spoken part in the beginning, the guitar riff that starts on its own, and then the way Bruce starts singing very, smoothly and in a creepy way, and it's just, that song is perfection. It's Iron Maiden at its best. It's super like frantic and heavy and blasphemous. Iron Maiden is really good at making sure that every title track is, like the best in the album, or nearly the best in the album. They are good at making sure that, like, Brave New World, Power Slave, also another great solo. They're good at doing that.
Dance of Death.
Dance of Death.
Seventh Son.
Yes, like their
Fear
title tracks really carry the torch. They like you usually, like, when you start listening to an album, you expect the title track to be banger, and they do that. They know how to do that every time. Notes on the production of the album. This album it has this sort of, maybe not airier, but it sounds like they are playing in a room that echoes every single instrument a bit more. They all have more body to them. The guitars are brighter and more distorted compared to Iron Maiden and Killers, and I like that. The bass playing is still, as you would expect, very, Harris style, but it's not as on the forefront as it is in Killers, for sure. So some very personal notes on why this album is so important to me. Like I said, I started listening to Iron Maiden because of grown-ups in my life that were very responsible and made sure that I would. And that means that I was a fan since I was very young. And this album in particular reminds me of that very early childhood, of my very early childhood, when I was, 4 years old, 5, up until when I was maybe 8. It reminds me of this house where we lived, my family, we lived in my hometown. We lived there for just over 2 years, but it was a very happy moment in our family's life. And it was the moment that I bonded with my brother the most, perhaps. And one of the things that we really bonded over was Iron Maiden. We would listen to Iron Maiden every night in bed before sleeping. And it was great. So this was the first Iron Maiden album that I actually listened to top to bottom on a daily basis. And that I listened to because I was not only, I always liked Iron Maiden, but I would actually talk to my brother about it. And he liked playing guitar. He started playing guitar back then at that time. So he was very much into the music and talking about it, and I would just absorb it all. It was great. My Animal Crossing Island tune is the melodic theme of Hallowed Be Thy Name. Second album on my list has to be Brave New World. It's also historic for a similar reason to The Number of the Beast. It's an absolutely historic album for Iron Maiden because Bruce Dickinson returns to the band with Adrian Smith. So they become a 6-piece and a 3-guitar band. And it really pleased the audience, especially those that weren't really pleased with the Blaze Bayley era. The awesomeness of the album starts right away with The Wicker Man, the opening track. It just starts hard and heavy, on your face, exciting. It gets you going immediately. Another thing, I keep thinking that you're gonna interrupt me. Another thing that makes this album awesome is the cover. It's pleasing to the eye. Let's start with that. The Number of the Beast is not necessarily pleasing to the eye, as awesome as it is, right? This one's pleasing to the eye. It's more artsy. And number one, it features a futuristic London. I like sci-fi. I like futuristic things. The way Eddie is included here. He's very abstracted, which makes him even more ominous than usual. He's supposed to be a figure of danger and evil. But when you turn him into stormy clouds watching over everyone, like, he's bigger here than in any other. If you think about it, he's bigger. He's the bigger he's ever gotten. And the most abstracted, harder to control kind of thing. It's just masterful, I think. So Derek Riggs is the artist that, he's responsible for all Iron Maiden covers, but this album in particular featured a second artist for the bottom half of this cover, the London part, which is an interesting fact about this cover. This is also the hottest that Bruce has ever looked. Now, it's interesting to highlight that even though this album was a return to their origins in terms of the formation, they had Bruce and Adrian back, and they had all of their guitarists together, that could mean that they would fall back into their old ways and, just do more of the same, or return to the Number of the Beast through Seventh Son of a Seventh Son type of writing. But they didn't. They delivered something very fresh, very new, and still very confident. That's not an easy achievement, I would say. And don't get me wrong, the Blaze era had really good songs that also became live staples, like Sign of the Cross and The Klansman. They're both incredible tracks. But Brave New World has a confidence and an energy that definitely wasn't there before. It has a certain maturity and brightness to it that really set it apart. And it really was a good collaboration. The writing credits are all over the place. Everybody but Nico participating in composing the songs. And it really shows that they knew each other, they know the band, they knew what to do once they got all back together. And they did it masterfully. And every single song in this album is worth really listening to it, fully devoted to them. Every single song is a banger. I think that the first track that I really got hooked on was probably Out of the Silent Planet. For a long time, Blood Brothers was my favorite Iron Maiden track of all. So, amazing tracks, top to bottom. The track Brave New World is also, it's so grand in its pessimism and melancholy. But then The Wicker Man is like, when that album starts, it hits all the right points simultaneously. And I can't not mention the Rock in Rio concert DVD for many reasons. One, because it's an absolutely historic concert for the band and for the history of heavy metal live concerts, to be honest. It was massive in every way. It was massive because it was the Brave New World tour, that the album had great reception. It was their reunion. And the venue and the event itself is just colossal, right? So it was the perfect way for them to really consolidate their new face with the 6 of them together with the 3 guitars in Brazil, in Rock in Rio. So, perfection, bliss. And the other reason why I have to mention that, it's because I was there. This was January 19th, 2001, and I will never forget that date because it was also my first concert ever. My first concert ever was that day. It was Iron Maiden Rock in Rio 3. Not a lot of people have the privilege to be able to say that. I do. I was 11. I was with my mom, my brother, and a person who is one of the most important people in my life, who is responsible for me being a metalhead. He was there too.
Who?
To Marcel. To me, that event in my life, I carry it as a badge of honor like you wouldn't believe. Also worth mentioning that my mother was there not against her will, because my mother is a metalhead. She is a metalhead. And so is my brother. My family is just top notch. So in the 90s, metal, was kind of like didn't have a whole lot of representation. there was a lot of like new metal coming around. It was becoming the new big thing. And, you know, Pantera was mainly responsible for carrying that flag for the genre throughout the 90s. And then it was important that in the year 2000, Iron Maiden came with Brave New World and said, nope, we're here. Metal is here. It's alive. Check it out. Not only they were, you know, a metal band, but they are one of the canonical ones, one of the ones that are staples in the genre and that have lasted for so long, right? So it was important that a canonical band of that stature would come along with something this relevant. I already mentioned Rock in Rio and how that's one of my personal reasons to consider this album so important to me. Another one is that it just, because of the sounds, because it's about dystopic future, and because it's about London, and because the clouds are there on the cover, it just makes, I like cloudy days. I really do. I've always been a fan of rain. I love rain. I don't like it when it's sunny for too many days in a row. And this album just brings that vibe to me. I just feel like it doesn't matter what kind of day it is. If I'm listening to it, it's a cloudy day. My third choice for this list is Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. It's their 7th album from 1988. And this is their first actual concept album, because Somewhere in Time had a theme, but it wasn't fully conceptual. This is conceptual. It's like you go on a journey when you start listening to it. For fans of power metal and symphonic metal like me, concept albums we like it, right? This was their last album with Adrian Smith before he left for a very long time. This was also their first album to feature keyboards, even though they used guitar synthesizers before. They did, right? Sorry. Yeah, okay. They used guitar synthesizers before in Somewhere in Time. Somewhere in Time has that very, because of that very 80s sound. If you like 80s sounds as a whole, you will appreciate Somewhere in Time. But here, this is even amplified with the use of actual keyboards. And it maintains that 80s vibe that I'm a total sucker for. And like I said, because it's a concept album, I think it comes very naturally for it to also be more progressive, right? Because like I said, it takes you on a journey. It creates a very cohesive experience that I really appreciate. And I think the way that they start the album with Moonchild having, the beginning of Moonchild works as an introduction to the album that feels like an introduction before the actual album starts. I think that's very typical of progressive albums and concept albums in particular. And it definitely sets the tone and it warms you up for something to come. It makes sense that this is a concept album and that it's more progressive because this is an era of Iron Maiden starting roughly with Power Slave, not so much, but there's a little bit of a theme being explored there. So it wasn't conceptual fully, but there was a theme, same thing in Somewhere in Time. They represent an era of the band that they were really experimenting, and it's plain to see with this one and Somewhere in Time in particular. There are some tracks here that I think are worth mentioning. I mentioned Moonchild, but Infinite Dreams to me is a thing of beauty. That track is a roller coaster of emotions in itself. Not only the album is like that because it's a concept album, but that song in itself has, I would say, 3 major moments in it that are very distinct. And the first one in particular is an oddball in Iron Maiden as a whole, because it's a very bluesy, groovy, soft beginning. It doesn't start like that. It starts with a guitar riff, a melodic guitar riff, but then it falls into that right in the beginning, and you're like, oh, where are they going with this? I like it. This song apparently, it inspired, I'm guessing, because, this came before Papa Roach, but...
Did it?
Yeah. There's the riff. Last Resort, the song by Papa Roach, sounds exactly like that. I don't know. Do people know that? Is that a thing that people know and talk about on the internet?
Yes.
Another thing that I really like about this album and that I also like about Brave New World is how the cover actually does a really good job eliciting the same emotions that the music in the album itself does. Because when I listen to it, because it's very synthy, there's an airiness to it. It's airy, it's dreamy, it's cold, and when I look at this, I mean, it's blue, which is a cold color. There's ice all over. It's just cold, right? It's more than unrealistic, it's surreal. I also appreciate the goriness in this album. They kind of revisit this composition style in the X Factor, way more gruesome than actually the X Factor. Like, it made me sick when I was a kid when I saw it for like the first times. Yeah, I like it. It's pretty cool. It's just, there's something very Salvador Dali in this cover. And the fact that this cover, like I said, it elicits the same emotions as the music itself in the album. It's not necessarily the case with other albums. Like Dance of Death doesn't do that for me. Peace of Mind doesn't do that for me either. This is one of those cases, and I appreciate this because I'm, into the visual arts. I'm an art historian. I appreciate when bands are able to communicate well with the artists that make their artwork so that there's cohesion. I think it's important. I also appreciate the fact that the title of this album, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, is, first of all, for a child in Brazil, it's impossible to say it. And it's a very mysterious and intriguing title. It immediately makes you think, oh, this is about something. The guitars are more, they're not as much on the forefront. They're a little muted and also less distorted. And that contributes to this feeling of dreaminess and airiness. When something is dreamy and airy, you think floating up, going up. When it's heavy, it's heavy, gravity comes down. So I think that's why it works well like that. The production really goes with the proposition of the album as a whole. And again, there are some personal reasons why I like this album as well. Music, everybody has some band or some song or some album that reminds them of moments in their lives. And this reminds me of not so much when, I started with The Number of the Beast when I was very, very, very young. And by the time it was the 2000s, I was 11, and that's when I went to see them in Rock in Rio. This one I was older. Even though Brave New World came after this, Seventh Son of a Seventh Son was the album that I got into the latest in my life out of these three that I'm talking about. So I was already, 14, 15, and I was more intellectually prepared to engage with these albums at a deeper level. And so I appreciated it in a different way as well. And it just reminds me of spending these very cold winter afternoons at my friend's house, my best friend's house. We would be in her bedroom the whole afternoon listening to this and geeking out in many different ways. And we were very much into fantasy and playing RPGs and video games, and it just gelled with the rest of that fantasy world that I feel really good when I remember it. And these are my 3 favorite Iron Maiden albums. This is a style of video that I'm going to be exploring more, at the same time that I will also continue doing the more academic art historical videos that I was doing before. So let me know what you think about this video. Let me know your thoughts on my choice. It's not easy to pick 3 albums of one of your favorite bands ever, and a band that has so many albums to choose from. So let me know if any of those would be on your list as well. If there's anything that you would ditch, anything that you would add, and why. Let's have that fun conversation. I hope to see you again on my next video.